I'm going to preach this morning because I'm excited. I love Advent. I'm an Advent junkie. I'm already ready to lose my voice because I'm singing all those hymns. You remember 2 weeks ago, I preached about the red cup from Starbucks, right? And the supposed war on Christmas, which really isn't a war on Christmas. We like to do that among ourselves, a war on Christmas. And I talked about it's not about the stuff. It's about preparing our hearts. You know, we say to people all the time, Merry Christmas, right? You're going to be saying it now until after Christmas 1,000 times. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. The word Christmas in English means Christ Mass. Remember we talked about that. You wish people have a Merry Christ Mass. Think about that. Merry Christ Mass. Have a really great Mass. You know, that liturgy that you celebrate in the middle of the night on December the 24th. Have a good one. That's what you wish people. Because it's not about the trees and the lights and the cookies and all kinds of other stuff. It's about that moment in history where Christ came to dwell among us. And at that Christ Mass, you have a close encounter of the God kind. You get to have an intimate participation in that reality where Christ comes to dwell among us. And that event should change your lives every year. And so we wish people a Merry Christmas. And if you remember during that homily, I said, let's do Advent differently this year. Let's not do it like we've always done it, where we're wrapped up in the hustle and bustle of buying gifts for people we don't even know or even like, and doing all kinds of other stuff, and not preparing our hearts to actually have a Merry Christ Mass. The church gives us a beautiful period of 4 weeks, which we call Advent, to get our hearts ready for that event on December the 25th. I want you to look at Advent through a different lens this year. And it's actually the very, very ancient way of looking at Advent. You see, the 4 weeks of Advent, as they slowly unfold among us, follow parallel to a first century Jewish wedding. We are preparing for a wedding. Whose wedding? Things look different in here today, right? The green of the time after Pentecost is long gone. The white from last week's Christ the King is long gone. And now the church wears this violet color. This color actually is the symbol of royalty during the time of Jesus. This color of violet was only worn by Caesar, and it was only available for the wealthy. This is a royal color. The dye back during the time of Jesus to make a color like this was extremely, extremely costly. It was made up of little tiny seashells that were crushed. And because it took so much of them and because they were so small, it was a very costly dye. And so the only people that could afford this color were royalty. So the church on the first Sunday of Advent dons the color of royalty. This isn't a color of penance, by the way. People get that confused. It's a color of royalty. So something during these 4 weeks has to deal with a king. It has to deal with royalty. We call this period Advent, from Latin adveniat, to come. So it's something about a king who is coming. Oh yeah, priests, we get that. Jesus is our king. Yay, 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 that's Christmas. The king shows up. Merry Christmas. No. It's like 40% of the truth. What's happening? In a first century Jewish wedding, the first thing that happens is the bridegroom, in our English, the groom, comes with his family to the place where the bride is, with her family. And they make a contract. It's called betrothal. You hear that in the scriptures. Mary and Joseph were betrothed. It was like a higher form of what we would call engagement, because there was actually a written contract that the marriage would happen. Then the groom would leave. He would leave the bride in her village with her family, and he would go to the house of his father. He would go back to his father's place. And there at his father's place, he would build a little tiny room, sometimes a larger room, depending on the wealth, adjacent to the father's home. And that would be the place where he would come and get his bride, and they would begin their life together. That's why Jesus, right before he's ready to ascend to heaven, says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust in me. In my Father's house, there are many, many rooms, so that where I am, you also may be. Jesus is hearkening back to that first century marriage ritual, that where he goes, he's making a house. He's making a little room in his Father's house to take his bride. So if Jesus the King is coming, who is his bride? All of us. St. Paul, we are the bride of Christ. No one knew when the wedding was going to happen. It wasn't like today where you got the little save the date announcement in the mail. You didn't get that posted in the Jerusalem Times in first century AD. No one knew when it was going to happen because you had to wait for him to build the house. And when the house was ready and all was ready to bring his bride to him, the first thing that happened was messengers would have been sent out, especially in the situation of a royal wedding. Messengers would have been sent out to say, guess what? The wedding is near. Get ready. You didn't know if the wedding was happening tomorrow, in an hour, in 2 weeks. You had to get ready. And so everything began to hustle and bustle as they began to prepare for the wedding. On this first Sunday of Advent, the heralds come forth. The church comes forth and announces a wedding is going to happen. It's going to happen between you and heaven, between you and Jesus. Get ready. It's coming. Get ready. Get ready for your wedding. First Sunday of Advent. Next week, we hear of a funny little guy named John the Baptist. All of us in this room would have probably stayed away from him because he was nuts. He looked nuts. He lived in the desert. He had locusts coming out of his teeth because that's all he ate. And what's he doing? He is standing in the River Jordan. Repent, the kingdom of God is at hand. And he's dunking people. Right? Why is that on the second Sunday of Advent? Because after the heralds would come into the city, the next person that would come into the city of the bride was the friend of the bridegroom, or in our English, the best man. Ladies, you weren't in charge of the wedding back then. Mothers, you definitely weren't in charge of the wedding back then. Mother-in-laws, forget it. The person who actually ran the wedding was the best man. And he would come into the city as the people were preparing for their wedding, and he would make sure the wedding preparations were started. And he almost became another brother to the groom. And he would watch over the bride. He would make sure nothing happened to her, and his primary responsibility was to make sure the bride was ready for the wedding. And back then, the first century Judaism, the way you got ready for a wedding is you went through your mitzvah purifications. Mitzvah is the ritual baths that people would go to for the forgiveness of sins and be spiritually prepared. And the best man would make sure the bride was going through her ritual baths. That's why John the Baptist is on the River Jordan. He's getting his bride ready. We are going through our mitzvah. We are being washed in the River Jordan to be ready for the wedding. And he shows up on the second week of Advent. The third week of Advent, as you heard one of the children point out, is rose. This isn't pink. This is rose. It's rose. The church, so excited, the bride, so excited for the wedding, now dons the color of light. If anyone was up, well, probably not this morning, but if you've ever seen the sunrise in the morning, what color does the sky turn? Rose. It begins to turn rose. The church dons then the garments of light because the Sun of Justice is about to shine upon us. The bride, the church, is now prepared and ready for the royal wedding, and she stands in excitement and takes on the color of the dawn that's going to destroy the darkness. As you heard as we blessed the Advent wreath, Christ has come to shatter our darkness, especially during this, the darkest time of the year. We shout to the darkness with light, and we even wear it on the third Sunday because we're so excited. And then around December the 17th, in the fourth week of Advent, the church begins to long for the bridegroom. And we begin to sing certain things that we call the O antiphons. Oh, wisdom, come and save us. For 7 days we're crying out. O Adonai, come and save us. O Radix Jesse, or Rod of Jesse. O Clavis David, I'm starting to speak Latin. Clavis David, O Key of David. Until we finally get to December 23rd and cry out, O Emmanuel, come and save us. You know them by our famous Advent hymn, O come, Emmanuel. But those are things that are said at evening prayer every night for 7 days prior to December 25th. And they're cries of longing. Longing as the bride is ready for the wedding. You didn't know when the groom would show up. All of a sudden, he would be at the gate. That's why we have the parable. Remember, Jesus taught us of the 10 virgins. 5 were ready, 5 were not. And their lamps were burning because they were just sitting, waiting for the wedding feast. And when the groom comes, the wedding starts. There would be a huge shout in the middle of the night. The bridegroom is here, come to welcome him. And they would start to party because the wedding would begin. That's why the Christ Mass happens in the middle of the night, because that's when the bridegroom comes. Jesus came to us in the middle of the night in that stable in Bethlehem, because it's all about a royal wedding. And then the guests come rushing to the wedding. The shepherds come with all of their prayers and humility. Then the wise men come even with their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This is our royal wedding. Advent is preparation for our royal wedding. It's more about trees and lights and all of that. It's a moment where God has loved you so much that he's coming to get you and wed himself to you. That's the mystery of Advent. That's why I'm jumping out of my skin. This is a moment of great joy. That's why the hymns that we sing, if you notice, boy, they're jumpy. There's a lot of joy in them because the church is getting excited because we're preparing for a wedding. How are you going to prepare for your wedding this year? Same old, same old? Hitting the malls until you're in debt? Never praying because we're too busy with baking cookies and running to this party and running to that party? We have to start to love as the King loves us, to be ready to wed him. Buy gifts for people that can't give you gifts back. Go spend some time at homeless shelters with people who aren't loved. Go to places where they're outcasts, because that's what the King does. Find time to talk with him in prayer. Spend time in prayer. Come to the many different things that we're offering during Advent here at All Saints to get your hearts ready. Because until your hearts are ready, you're never going to experience Christmas for what it is. And I want everyone in this room this year to actually say, Merry Christmas. Be joyful because it's your wedding. Be joyful at the Christ Mass when the King comes through these doors and you get to have a close encounter with him so your lives are changed. Be ready, church. He's coming.